Welcome to the BodPod, the podcast where everybody is welcome. I'm your host, Rachel K. Grimm, and each week we welcome old and new friends to talk all things body image, self-love, and confidence. This is the BodPod.
All bodies are good. Your body with how it is good, is valuable.
Hey, BodPod squad. I'm Rachel K. Grimm, the confidence coach behind Ditch the Click and your BodPod host. Every week from my cute Brooklyn apartment, I'm bringing you all of the confidence boosting conversations from some of your favorites in the space. And today we have someone who you might remember as a panelist from BodCon. We have Miriam Lara-Mejia. Miriam is an educator and a mom on a mission to empower parents to raise children to accept themselves and celebrate body diversity for all. Beautiful, beautiful title that leads me immediately, Miriam, into a question for you. Because
Let's go.
I have a little story for you, actually, to precursor to the question. My best friend, she lives abroad, so we FaceTime a lot. And we were FaceTiming last week. And she had the opportunity to see her family for the first time since the holidays. And she said to me, I'm visiting my family. And my mom commented on my body that I've gained weight. And she brought this up to me because her and I always talk about the not commenting on people's bodies and the impact of that. And she said to me, and it's stuck in my mind since she said it, she said, I expect this now from my mom and my mom's generation as women who were told it was okay to eat 3 almonds and a cube of cheese for lunch, right? That's been living in my mind. Then over the weekend, I had brunch with a friend and she brought up to me like struggles that her sister has been having regarding food and her body. And she said, I was concerned for my sister's well-being. So I brought it up to my mom. And she said, I noticed my mom siding more with my sister than understanding where I was coming from of like this triggering behavior of my sister. And these 2 things happened within a week, these 2 conversations with my friends. And it made me think back to things in my life, in my childhood that have been said to me by my mom or other impactful women in my life that have skewed the way that I see my body. I always remember I didn't wear white jeans for the longest time because I think I was a freshman in high school. I was going to wear white jeans. And I vividly remember my mom saying, no, you can't wear those. Your thighs are too big for white jeans. And I swear to God, for a decade, I didn't wear white jeans, right? So I bring all of this up because these conversations with friends have just happened. And then I read your bio that says you are empowering parents to teach their children to not have these limiting beliefs on their bodies and be accepting of all. And so it makes me think, what was the trigger for you? Or what was the trauma for you? Or what was the spark that said, I need this to be like literally my life's mission. I need this to be what I do.
I think what you shared, anybody who's listening can give us the example of something our parent or someone in our life that told us something, right? Like I get messages from people in my community who literally like one coach said one time this one thing, and it shaped forever that person's relationship with movement, for example. I like to say that I grew up in a feminist home, but I also, like all of us, grew up in an incredibly fatphobic home. And I mean this, I think people get confused about fat phobia and they think it's like discrimination. No, it's any belief that we have that is based on the belief that fat bodies are inferior. Mm-hmm. And it permeates everything, right? It permeates our entire lives. It's inside of us, in our relationships, in our institutions. And so I don't remember a single time that my mom was not doing a diet. And, her body was bigger and always was bigger, but she always was on a diet. I don't remember a time where she wasn't on a diet. Now, I have been in all kinds of spaces around body positivity. I was actually thinking about an older colleague of mine from my work that now is my friend, who actually was my first body positive icon, because she just was like the body positive in the broadest sense. Like all bodies are good. Your body with how it is good, is valuable. And that is truly the first time that I kind of heard that, right? That I really was like, of course, I get to exist in this world. But I would say, of course, it was kind of amazing being in the BodCon and seeing some of the people that, were the first body positivity, activists and influencers that I saw like 10 years ago. But I would say the biggest moment for me of why I decided to kind of dedicate my life to this, well, one was having a pregnancy and having a child. And I think almost everybody that has a child that is a desired pregnancy will have this experience where you're like, I see this human and I want you to know that you are incredible as you are, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to this world where the world is like, it's just, even since they're babies, it's like how big they are, how fat they are, how fat or how much are they eating or not eating, all these things that like start building this incredible baggage around how we exist in the world, right? I started to really get involved with people who were doing body positive parenting and people who were doing fat activism and all this, like kind of really learning a lot of stuff. But the big kind of catalyst moment for me was my mother-in-law. There's actually two, but my mother-in-law during the pandemic was talking about a cousin of my husband's, and she was 6 months pregnant. And she said, my mother-in-law said, wow, she's so skinny. She's so good. And I was like,
skinny relating to good.
Exactly. Right. And that's, I mean, everybody hears this, but I'm saying like in pregnancy, you must definitely like being skinny is not a, I mean, you could be skinny and all these different ways, but
Sure.
praising someone for being skinny during pregnancy was such an alarm. And I was like, I am going to be a person that is going to transform this limiting belief for my mother-in-law. But the other big catalyst for me was my mom developed Alzheimer's, and, as many people that have Alzheimer's, she started to lose weight because, people start eating differently, and, she just like didn't eat basically. And I remember like walking with her, we would go on walks, through the park, and people who hadn't seen her, didn't know that she had Alzheimer's, would be like, Miss Lara, oh my gosh, you're so thin. Oh my gosh, you're so healthy. You're so, and it was such a shocking moment that like this constant celebration of thin bodies over healthy bodies, right?
Yeah.
And, also imagining my mom who always was in a diet, she would have been thrilled to have a skinny body, but at what cost?
At what cost?
Right?
At
Like
what
here we
cost?
are like seeing my mom like disappear into the world in this body that she would have celebrated, but it's not worth it, right? So I think that kind of all those pieces combined. And then like, definitely like as soon as you start reading about the impact families have, like we are incredibly important in shaping our kids' perceptions of themselves. We can all know the negative impacts of that our parents have had on us. But we actually have this incredible power to shift that. And so when I, started looking at the tools, like what does it look like to raise a kid and a child from a body positive perspective? This idea that body diversity is like, this is the norm. Every single body is different, even if they tell us in those magazines that they're not, right? And really challenging our beliefs around words, because I feel like sometimes in the body positive movement, we like say like, you're beautiful, but it's like, there's a lot of stuff that we say. Like, for example, I want to just share this example. My child now has glasses, and I realized, I was talking to him and I was like, one of your eyes is just, it's just not good. This one eye is not good. And it was like, no, like that's just how his eye is. He needs glasses to help him see better, but it doesn't mean his eye is not good. But it's just, exactly. But it's just so, we're in this like deficiency mode, right? We're constantly talking about our bodies and their bodies and all bodies in this way. And it's just like incredibly, it's truly powerful when you can switch. And you can see that we have this incredible power, both internally. I feel like that's what's cool. Like both of the work that we have to do for ourselves, doing it in tandem as we are raising kids to believe that they are just incredible and unique parts of this world around body diversity.
Going off of that, you're so right. We are always kind of trying to be better, be a better version of ourselves, and not like accepting ourselves right here. And I think what's interesting is as adults, right, we are in a place of being able to recognize what happened when we were younger that impacted how we feel now, and we're trying to make those changes. And what's so awesome about what you do is you are now empowering someone early on to be in charge of how they see themselves, and not allow so much of that like outside noise to impact how they're going to see themselves down the road. I'm curious to dive into what those tools are and what those pieces are. Obviously, I know that you are killing it on social, sharing all of the tools, but I want to
Yeah.
know like what those are and how you implement them and how you instruct others to do so.
I mean, I would say number one is, if you're, of course, in this conversation, if you're in this podcast and if you're in this space, you are already doing this work, right? But number one for sure is
Love
like,
it. Yes.
yeah, there we go. It like, people think that it's a thing you do external, but it's actually the work you do to you, right?
Mhm.
How do you talk about your body?
Yes.
Okay, that's the
Yes.
number one thing. I do a lot of skits about this, but it is incredibly transformative to talk about fat bodies or fat bellies or whatever part, like hair that is curly or not curly, all these things in positive ways. And I know like people are like, I meaty, that's like so cheesy, but it actually
It works.
changes. It works. It does.
It
Yeah,
works.
it works. And we haven't heard it, right? Like like I love to do this practice where like my child will like touch my belly and be like, oh, mira, it's like, it's whatever, right? And it's like, yes, it is. It is
Yeah.
round. It is floppy. It has this fold. It has this thing. Like, it is okay.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to be like, oh, that's it, and then you're body positive. No, it's just one part, right? So the work we do internally, and yes, people are healing their relationship with their food,
Mhm.
learning about intuitive eating or healing their, relationship with movement. A lot of
Mhm.
us, I mean, that's one of my big passions, is like, I, like many people who have bigger bodies, were told movement was only for losing weight.
Right.
And we missed out on this, building this really
The
positive
joy.
relationship, the joy, the functionality, the stress management, all these things. But for example, I often have shared with like my son, like I always work out on Wednesdays with my husband. And sometimes he wakes up, and my son, and I'll be like, I have to go finish. I have to go finish. And I realized this switch where I was like, I want to go finish. I don't have
Yeah.
to go finish. I can
Yeah.
not go finish, but I
Yeah.
want to. This is like showing, really showing, not telling, really showing what we mean. I think some of the key parts are also around diets. I've done a lot of research on the impact of a dieting mom, a
Mhm.
person especially, I mean, the research is based mom-daughter. That doesn't mean that
Right.
as the only relationship, but we see a significant rise in people having eating disorders and, body issues later in life when they were in homes where the mom dieted. So, I know it's hard, but like, I feel like even if you can't stop dieting because you're not there yet in that movement, definitely like not talking about diets is
Yeah.
incredibly beneficial to support, people's capacity to survive, the processes around eating disorders. I think also really being consumers of body diversity. Now we live in an era, if you're raising kids or you're an aunt, uncle of there's so much, right? I have like a whole library of books that are about body diversity and celebrating uniqueness. And there's a lot of stuff. There's also a lot of, shows, but it's not only about like consuming media that has body diversity, but it's also being critical of why we still have a lot of media that doesn't show body diversity,
Yeah.
right? I
Yes.
mean, we can all repeat this stat, right? Like the majority of women in the United States are 16 to 18,
Mhm.
size 16 to 18. Why don't we see them? Why are they not in our, that if they're the majority, they should be in all kinds of things, right? So we can also teach our kids to be critical of those questions. I actually, what's interesting for me is that I have like my son, but I also have my nieces and nibblings, the non binary word for niece and nephew. And
Yes.
they are also, I love to see kind of how they're living in the world and now having words to question why they don't see body diversity.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, although I think that affirmations are really good, I don't think that the end all be all, but actually it is powerful to hear from someone in your life tell you that you're valuable, that you're good, that your body's good. I mean, I think the teen years are particularly hard for
Yeah.
for most of us, right? Because first of all, our bodies are changing, right? So
Mhm.
I don't know how it was for you, but I was like, my whole family was skinny up until puberty. And then, when puberty hit, then we all became bigger. That was a
Yeah.
shift. We
Yeah.
didn't know
Yes.
how to think about it. Like, it was like, what did we do wrong? But how can all of us, four of us, all literally have the same experience, right? And then, of course, so much, right? Like, I feel like the teen years are the time, who has boobies, who has voice changed, who all these things are happening. So there's so much attention. Everybody's looking at a teen person. And it can be very hard. And there's some research also around like hormones and body image. I also think that it's really, really important that parents pay attention. If your child is having behaviors that can be associated with an eating disorder, like having support, and especially the sort, from therapy that is very trauma aware, that is very, that's concerned around weight stigma, like those are really important. Being able to provide a lot of guidance and support for people who are experiencing issues around their bodies early on. I feel like there's a little bit of a call out. I personally enjoy this process of calling people out, this idea that like we can be interrupters of language that is fatphobic, that is harmful for people's self-esteem. We must do that, right? Like we can't control everybody. We can't,
Mhm.
my suegra, my mother-in-law, like maybe your friend's mom, like you cannot change truly people, but you can create boundaries and you can be this powerful interrupter. Because again, the key when we talk about parenting or anything, it's not necessarily what you tell your child. It's like how you live your life. And
Yes.
if you can be the person who, like, maybe not always, but sometimes when you hear someone talking about someone's weight, you say, no, we don't talk about people's weight, and you just leave it at that. And
Mhm.
sometimes that
Mhm.
is like the most powerful experience for a small person, a teen, a kid. So I want you to take, what I share is really like, they're just tools. Take what you can, take what serves you, take, what doesn't. It's not about following a strict way. It's about
Yes.
kind of putting into reality the work that we're doing, like in these spaces, right? Like, let's
Yes.
bring body positive to the whole life cycle, to our every space
Yes.
that we're at.
I think it's important to recognize that it's not a just you snap your fingers and you're immediately confident or that you're speaking differently, that it is a process, and we said that some of these tools are maybe a little light, or you said about, the words might not make a difference right away, or you might think that those words are just little, but to someone else, they're big. And it's, I always find it so important to recognize that we're all starting from like step one, and we have to start small at step one and build upon step one in order to get to step 1000. Sometimes we all backtrack, but that's okay. I was having a conversation with a girl who I coach, and she was telling me about her relationship with her mom and how she and her mom speak about their bodies. And this person, she also has a child herself. And so she's really thinking about how she speaks about her body, and then how she's hearing her mom speak about her body and other people around her. And she made a comment to me about, I've noticed that my mom isn't necessarily speaking positively about her body, but she does speak differently around me now. And she continued on in the conversation. And I said to her, I want to backtrack, and I want to, like, as you just did, applause for you for a second, that you have been so open and so willing to bring up to your mom, like, hey, mom, that's not appropriate to say. Or, hey, no, actually, I don't want you speaking like that in front of me or in front of my child. And though maybe her mom is not speaking positively yet, her mom is still somewhere in that step one, two, three of speaking a
Got
little
it.
bit
Yeah.
differently about the bodies. And so, going off of that, I want to know, whether it's you talking to someone online or you talking to your mother-in-law or whoever it might be, or a friend, when you find yourself feeling the need to speak differently, or call them out for something that they say. I'm curious, do you have like I don't know if there's a better way to ask this, like a nice way of doing so? Or
Yeah.
because people get really scared. About this girl I was coaching,
Yeah.
she was like, I don't want my mom to be mad at me.
Yeah. I like to talk about it kind of I call it like, I don't know if that's, but I call it a rainbow of options, right?
Okay,
Because
we love.
I feel like people often are like, oh, you should call everybody out and do it this way. And it's like, that's not possible. That's not true. And that's like not the best use of my energy,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I like to have, kind of like this whole, where you want to start, because sometimes it
Mhm.
is about like, is there an opportunity for education?
Mhm.
Okay, maybe. Is there an opportunity for interruption, which is
Mhm.
not the same as I'm not going to educate you and try to change your mind, which is something I like to do sometimes. And sometimes it's possible, but I'm just going to be like, right now, I'm putting a limit. My child is with me and I don't want to talk about that. And that can also be a tool, you have in your sleeve ready to use. And sometimes it is about not being in those spaces or removing myself from a space. I'm not going to educate or put a limit to everybody, because not everybody can receive it, right? We can all
Right.
acknowledge that to be true. And sometimes it is about like doing kind of what I call like peripheral education, where I'd be like, I will not interrupt. Like my mother-in-law talks a lot about diets and
Mhm.
like how people should do the thing, or if
Mhm.
they're fat because they ate so many, whatever. And I sometimes I will not engage with what she's saying. But then later on with my son, I will be like, this is why
Oh,
your grandma sasaid this.
that's
Some
a great
people
tip.
grew up believing foods are good and bad,
Mhm.
and they do these behaviors. And, we are, you and I know kind of those things, right? Like
Yeah.
and sometimes it is about like simply, unfortunately, I feel like, and I don't know if this is true for a lot of people who come from immigrant homes or first generation or not, but the idea of like actually not going to spaces that I know are going to be spaces surrounded by people who are constantly talking about bodies.
Yeah.
That is also a choice. That's also a privilege, right? I also want to
Yes.
acknowledge that that is true for me, but it's not true for everybody. We don't have to change people to have a learning moment, right? But I also do that separately with my son. And I also do it in conversation with my husband. And I also like, learning, like, as you said, it's not like a once off. It's a
Yes.
constant, it's a process. And it's also like, sometimes I have snapped to my mother-in-law, and that's not the best learning experience, right? Because then my son learns like you just snap and it's like, there's no conversation and there's no growth, right? So we can
Right.
also be like, maybe that was not the best way, right? I think right now, especially, and this can be true for a lot of people, schools are a space where, how people talk about food and movement in schools is incredibly harmful around body image.
Mhm.
And, but you don't have a lot of control of the curriculum in a school, right? Or not a very direct way. You can definitely get organized and
Right.
mobilized, but it's not going to be like boom, 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 right?
Right.
So those are places where we can be like, this is what you're learning in school. And
Right.
let's talk about, why we want to talk about food in a non-moral way. And how does that help us? And why do we believe all food is good? And, how we talk about movement is not just for, losing weight, all these things, right? So there's learning happens in all these spaces. In terms of like how if there's one formula to responding nicely, I don't think so. I mean, I think it really depends on who you're talking to. And I think maybe you want to share about your experience with your mom and your sister, but like it really depends on like what level of comfort you have with people and what they are willing to receive. There's no one rule for everybody. I also really think that we don't necessarily have to be polite, and then that's another conversation that's for me again like a point of privilege, because I get to walk away from family that is like that. But I feel so powerful for my son to hear that. Now, I think it's been really interesting for me. I have like a niece that's 5 and my son that is 5. And my niece has been so much more welcoming to this fat positive language. Like she was writing me stories about gordas, about fat women, and she like wrote me a play. And my son, however, I feel like this is a conversation that we're not really talking about how boys are receiving
Mhm.
messages around like, the single body, right? Like all
Yes.
boys have to look like this and have to be like that. And he's a little less accepting of these messages. And it's kind of an interesting, like,
Yeah.
how are we making body positive language super inclusive for all kids, for all teens? Because
Right.
it isn't just a girls thing, right? Even though
Right.
we see a lot of data around girls, like everybody's getting a message about what is a good body and what's a bad body. And we need to like have more tools to interrupt it in all the spaces that our kids and teens experience.
Absolutely. I think it's important too to note what you said about boundaries, and that the boundaries, just as the process looks different for everyone, those boundaries look different. As you said, a lot of those boundaries are privilege, but those boundaries that we set up for ourselves also empower others around us to create boundaries too, right? And
Mhm.
therefore allow children to create boundaries, whether it's in their present or in their future. And I
Yeah.
think what you said, though, obviously you're speaking to mothers and fathers and parents, right? And how they're empowering their children. But even for those of us who don't have children, it's so thoughtful in terms of how we approach conversations with either our families or people around us, and how we draw those boundaries. And you're right that sometimes our energy is not best utilized in that way, in arguing about how something is said. But I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you saying that. You'll say to your son, though you won't say it in the moment to, like, say, your mother-in-law, you'll set your son aside later and say, "Hey, this thing that was said, this is why we say it differently, or we don't say it at all, or we don't comment on this." Because I think about how much that would reframe for me as a child the way that I would see things. Because when something is reinforced by people, especially when it's an adult, when you're a child, like, of course you're going to believe that is true. And being the one who's willing to say, "Hey, no, that isn't how it has to be. That's not how it's said." It's really, 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 really hard to do, but it's like it really does catapult change into whatever that space you're in, even if you aren't the one to witness the change. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely. And I think, I think this piece of like involving our kids and our teens in conversation, like you
Mhm,
heard that, like,
mhm.
and it's not like they're gonna be like, well, I think the
I
theory, like, of course not. But like, yeah, like for example, we spent 1 week in New York with my mother-in-law, and we came back and my son was like, yeah, that shark, we're telling a story. He's like, that shark is fat because he ate a lot. And I was like, where did that come from? Like, we've never said it. And it was clear that like just that 1 week was impactful,
Wow.
and so then
Yes.
we have a conversation like, why would it be like, doesn't everybody eat? I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of people eat. Does
Yeah.
everybody have a fat body? Does everybody have a skinny? These, it's not only about like being like, this is not how we do it, but it's like, let's ask that question. Like, why is that character that in that Disney movie? Why are all the characters that are evil often fat? Why do they have to be fat? Right? That's a little bit of what I talk about around media literacy, because I think
Mhm.
we are brought up to just like not question like this. How would why would you question a Disney movie? And I also want to say like a lot of my community asked me this, like how to be a like a tia, an auntie, an uncle, how to be, how, like when you see behaviors like, people in homes that have a very strong conversations around diets and weight loss, right? And especially right now, the American Pediatric Association new guidelines around like offering, kids and teens like drugs and bariatric surgery, like crazy, right? Like these are crazy conversations. And I've always said, like, we, again, leading by example sounds so cheesy, but like you can be a space of peace and safety for someone. It doesn't mean you're going to go and change how their parents are raising them. You can't do that. But as a person who is an auntie, a friend, a godparent, you can kind of be, offering this other space, this other experience, this other conversation, because often it is in those moments where we see something different, that we hear something different, that we see like what you said, like living differently, like being able to live, for me, being my son, being, seeing me make my videos with bikinis or whatever with my belly, like it is gonna it's transforming him. It
Mhm.
transforms him because I am not hiding behind a pillow, right? I am not like hiding in not being in the photo, even if my mother-in-law does, right? Like she's constantly being like, oh my gosh, those photos are awful. Cause I'm like, you look beautiful, you look amazing, you look happy. Like, let's change that narrative. And so I want to say, like, this is not for everybody, but I do like the idea that social media allows us to kind of showcase body positivity in all the frame, because I see it. I see my son you know, the fact that I embody this work, you know, is powerful. So at the same time, I think around body positivity, talking about embodiment, I think it's so powerful to help our kids know their bodies. I think there's so much of diet culture and, you know, weight stigma is like this separation, right? Like, don't know your hunger, don't know your tiredness, don't know your body, because you should never see your body, you know, you should never, you know, accept your body. And I think that this process of embodiment is such a powerful tool for our kids to like know their hunger, to know their bodies, to see their bodies, and to accept themselves.
I want to talk about the example that you lead online in general, but also the fact that you do so in Spanish and why that is so just like important to you and to your brand.
Yeah, I mean, I like to talk about social media because I feel like sometimes we hear this like, oh, social media is bad or everything's a
Yes.
lie in social media, and then here we are,
Girl,
you know, here we
I
are, like it's just so weird because also, I mean, that's the whole point is like if you have a particular uniqueness, you will find other people in social
yes.
media that have that, and that is the
Yes.
power, right? So like I feel like when we talk about kids and social media, that's also part of media literacy, this idea of like you have to curate your spaces, right? Like clean your house, you curate your social media. You know,
Yes.
a study came out recently that said even a small dose of body positive content that people see in their social media has an impact, a positive impact, their body image, especially for young
Truly.
people. It truly
Yes.
is true. And so,
Can I tell you, even sometimes this might sound silly, but I feel like if anyone gets it, you'll get it. Sometimes I even look back at my own content and I'm like, hell yeah, Rachel. Yeah, like
yeah,
you're really making me feel better in my body today, let
yes.
alone when I see it from other people. You
Yes,
know,
because
it's
I feel like I don't know
powerful.
if this is true for you, but I feel like I was really radical, like in my beginning of my. Now I'm like, you know, because now I've gone through so many whatever, but like my beginning was like, ugh, you know, like super.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. And you know, when I started this, I realized like there's a lot of communities here in the U.S. Actually, my most popular content, the one that has like millions of views and TikTok, all my skits really had to do with this dynamic, right? There's like how to answer people who are commenting about your weight and your mom who's like saying, don't wear that, don't wear those white pants, don't wear those white pants because they don't look on you, right? Because this is like a such a common experience. In my mind, I hadn't really kind of understood that as
Mhm.
much until I, you know, I had like 4 million views and 5 million, like all these different things. And in the comments, just being like, this is a thing that people are experiencing. Now, you know, Latinx communities in the US represent a big chunk of the US, and Spanish actually language represents a huge chunk of people who only speak Spanish or speak both languages in the US. But a lot of the body positive content is not in Spanish.
Right.
And especially because I feel like there's this, you know, when we talk about body liberation and stuff like that, you know, it does center a lot of
White
whiteness.
women. Yes.
Yes, white women. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about Latinx communities, for example, and the intersection of body positive and say diabetes, body positive and heart disease, and when we talk about, you know, poverty and stress and all these other things that are impacting people's health, you
Yes.
know, it's like almost as if you have diabetes, you should never have body positive. And it's like that is it just doesn't go, right? Like
Yeah.
you definitely should have body positive no matter what health condition you have. And
Right.
actually we know that having a body positive perspective and a positive body image have repercussions, positive repercussions on our capacity to take care of ourselves. We all know this. We all know this, right? Like everybody who's
Yes.
here, like, you know, when you love yourself and you can accept yourself, you can do a lot more to like take care of yourself, right? So I realized like I originally was like, this is going to be for Latin America, even though I'm in the US. But my community in the US started growing and growing. And I realized there's just a lot of people who want to talk to their moms. They want to
Yeah.
have tools to talk about their spaces, and they just didn't have them, right? Not just talking
Yes.
about body positivity, but like, you know, really, really questioning weight stigma and fat phobia and like talking about parenting and like all these other pieces. And so I am, you know, I get pushed a lot and I do want to do more bilingual content. It's just that I feel like there's such a vacuum. There's just you know, and I see it, for example, I am in California. My kid goes to a school that is like 60% Latinx. And all the messages that they get in Spanish are incredible. Like they are promoting bad body image, you know, in real true ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I am starting here. Like I already have a curriculum for the school that I want to, like, when we talk about diversity, let's bring body size, because it's incredible that we don't talk about body size as part of like the diversity. It just should be, right? And there was like that big movement in New York. We need to talk about body size as part of the whole spectrum of diversity that we talk about, and we just don't, you know?
Yes.
And so I actually did a reading at his school for another class where I took one of my body positive books that I read, and it was kind of fascinating to see this kids. First, they were kind of like, "Ooh, oh, she's fat," like in the story, right? And I sort of like turned around and was like, "Oh, well, let's look at everybody here. Is everybody the same? Is everybody the same?" Right. And that kind of moment of like, no, we are not. Everybody's different. So I feel like one piece is like, I definitely want to uplift the Latinx community. I think that the messages that we are getting still for the Latinx community are incredibly paternalistic and incredibly white centered. Like even like food, like when we talk about, intuitive eating, we're in like whatever nutritious food, we still are like, oh, kale, for what, like all these native in like community cultural foods are nutritious, right? But we don't talk about them that way. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done there. Talking about movement, I am appalled that so much of the conversation is still centered around losing weight. Like I want us to move our bodies, and like let's support moving our bodies for all these things, right? But also understanding, let's talk about like people not having time, having two jobs, people, not having public spaces to move their bodies. Like this is not a conversation that is just like move your body, right? Like it truly is a societal conversation around like social determinants, right? And I think that because of having this power, I actually grew up in Mexico, but my mom was from Wisconsin, so she moved to Mexico, and I grew up in Mexico as an American immigrant in Mexico, if that makes sense. It's kind of a confusing, but I feel strongly that there's this way that we can uplift all the Latinx community, and really I'm proud of being bilingual, and I feel like sometimes we kind of have to sacrifice. I feel like for sure I've like sacrificed a couple of brand deals that they were like, well, we want to do it in only in English, and I was like, I am really committed to my community. I want to really uplift. And again, like I am doing speaking gigs and stuff like that in English as well, and often in this duality, right, of people who are also bilingual. Like I would say the majority of the people who consume my content are bilingual.
Okay.
They're trying to get, tools to exist in their communities with tools. Like they don't even know the word for fatphobia. They don't know the word for weight stigma. Body positivity isn't a word that we translate even in Spanish, because it's like, there's just no word for it.
100%. I want to highlight here the BodCon app for anyone who hasn't accessed it yet. We launched the BodCon app when we had the BodCon earlier in March, and on the app, we're really creating a space of community and community conversation around body confidence. As you said, there are spaces online, and we are lucky to be women who have created spaces online that generate that type of conversation. But all of us are often looking to be able to consume more of it, but also to contribute to. And if you're listening to this podcast, you don't have to be speaking on this podcast to be active in the app. It is a space that you can contribute to yourself too. And it's been really fun and active since the conference, but it's something that we absolutely want to keep going. And we have series in there and resources and tools in there. Obviously, the podcast is always updated in there too, but just really a space to create conversation, because like you said, those spaces to create conversation are so important. And I find it to be so impactful too, Miriam, that you are doing so kind of at like the ground level for your community. Like you are kind of, as I said earlier, paving the way. You're making that foundation to give other people the opportunity to speak in the way that you are.
I like to tell people that we are all influencers, right? We think of influencers as someone with a social media following. No, you are an influencer. That is literally the whole thing about body positive parenting, is that you are the most important influencer in your spaces, right? And so to me, see it with my son and also with my husband. My husband is Colombian American. He grew up in a very fatphobic home, and we are all working through our fatphobia, but it is fascinating to have moments where like real shifts happen, right? Because again, like what you were saying, I think earlier, like, it's not like things happen immediately. Like you do one thing, you say one word, and then suddenly, oh, your body. No, like it's like you're kind of working through a lot of things in a lot of different directions. but to see it real change in real time, you will see it in your life and in your families and yourself, right? Yourself first, but it's powerful to be reminded of that. But the app kind of helps people find each other, right? That's kind of the power of social media, right? But this idea of like,
Yes.
you have a
Yes.
mom here, or you're a tia, or you're not even thinking about kids, you're worried about this other thing. Like, that's what you want, and you want to have a place where people are inherently, because they're choosing to be in this app, they want to be with people who are in this path wherever they are. And I love that. I love that kind of understanding and finding your community within a community.
I know I love being on there. I'm so excited that you're on there. We already have such a great community built there, but I could talk about the app forever. But I do have another question for you, because I could also talk to you forever too, Miriam. I always ask everyone that comes on the BodPod, what does confidence mean to you? But so I want to ask you that, but I also want to ask you, you spoke a lot to what you do to fill others up, what you do to set the example. Sure, we talked a little bit about what we're consuming online and things, but I want to know, is there a resource that you specifically that you go to and you're like, this fills me up so that I can go out and educate and empower too? So I want to know that, and I want to know what confidence means to you.
Okay, let's start with confidence. And I
Okay.
think, when we hear body positivity, often we kind of think just body, right? External body. But actually, when we talk about confidence, and for me, it's the idea of knowing and recognizing you.
Mhm.
And that's kind of hard. I mean, I think we get so many messages, right? Like, I have, for example, ADHD. So much of my life has been like, I am a klutz. I don't know. I blah, blah, plus like imposter syndrome, plus like being an older woman, plus I don't know, all these things, right? And also like all the body things, right? Like you don't
Right.
have the bubble butt, you don't have the all the time, right? So I feel like we're like in this tornado, right? Of all the things that someone else is saying to us and telling us, and that we believe. And for me, the pieces around confidence that I have been really cultivating, I feel like what I like to remind myself is that confidence is a habit. It's a skill. Is this thing that we are practicing, that we get like deviated from for many reasons, right? And then we kind of like try to get ourselves. And it has become this piece around like, I know, like namaste, like I can see the light in myself. And again, like I think sometimes when we think confidence is like, we think external, we think someone who is showing that light, someone that is, and I do that a lot in my work, and I love it, and I think it's really important. But profoundly, it's like knowing your light.
Yeah.
And it is definitely a process. And also, as we said, we change. There's
Yes.
no static confidence. And so when I
Mhm.
think about confidence for kids and teens, people often want to be like, oh, just tell them that they're good and all, but it's actually like help them cultivate the capacity to see, exactly, to see
Yes.
that light, and to know that light is worthy, right? And
Mhm.
again, like there will be moments, like there's moments where that is not as obvious, not as easy to tap into it, but we work at it. And so
Yes.
I want us to move away from this idea of confidence as a static thing, and more of this constantly, this plant that we're constantly like feeding, that we're constantly tending to, that sometimes might get a little wilted, so that we put a little more water, like that kind of really dynamic thing. And then in terms of like what I tap into, I do have to say that because my work is in social media, I have to step away from social media. And that is such a
Girl,
powerful
same.
thing. Yeah,
Yes.
it is a
Yes.
powerful thing, to be able to, because it can get so, right, like for me, and especially I think for people who monetize too, where you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't get that deal. Oh my God, I should be doing that. Oh my gosh, and you, again, this piece of like getting away from your own light,
Yeah.
getting away from the thing that you're bringing, getting away from, so I have to like close things. And so for me, I absolutely, there's three things that like feed me, which is like, I love reading. I read about like 50 books a year. And I love cooking. And I love
Mm.
cooking. I think anybody who maybe is a parent or is a caregiver, or so, it's like sometimes cooking can be such a, I have to do it, but like when I can do it because I want to do
For
it,
fun.
for
Yes.
fun, or
For
like,
fun.
I just recently made yogurt from scratch and my sourdough, and like I feel so like homesteady, like that makes me feel really, really good. And then I really, really love Zumba. I love all the kind of
Love it.
dancing
Yeah.
movement, and movement for sure is like this past 2 weeks, it's been raining here in California. We haven't been able to do outdoor workouts, which is a big part of me. That's one of the reasons why I'm like so passionate about changing this concept of exercise to movement, because for me, it is one of the things that allows me to, connect with my body, right? Like it's part of
Yeah.
this whole conversation around embodiment, like being able to take care of me through this work. And yes, but I also have a lot of fat activists that I follow. I honestly do feel like beyond body positivity, I realize like what really feeds me are fat activists. Like that's who is really doing a lot of the work, a lot of the like really pushing the boundaries, really kind of like I'm often like my mind is blown. So I consume a lot of resources and a lot of Substacks, a lot of newsletters from people. So being able to kind of engage with that, and I feel like sometimes, and I don't know how this is for you, where like this whole conversation about everything is content, everything is content, everything is content, like being able to go, like I went to this little concert and like I didn't take a picture, like I just was like, I'm here. That is part of a work, because it's just like, I don't know. I'm a consumer and a creator of content, and I'm like, I just have to get off of the content wheel.
I couldn't relate to that more, honestly. The idea of to what you said, what we do is truly our vocation, which I appreciated you saying that, by the way, because I do feel that what I do is literally why I'm here. It's what I'm meant to do with my entire life. But sometimes, just like anything else, that can be tiring. And it's important to find ways to like fill yourself up. And when your vocation is so closely tied to one specific thing. But I just have to tell you, thank you so much for this conversation. I know that you are speaking a lot to parents and, like you said, to aunties and just people who are empowering children. But, as someone who does not have children, it still is such an empowering resource and tool for me to know how to go to approach conversations, but also for like my nieces and nephews and other young ones in my life. So thank you so much. I know that if it impacted me in that way, there are so many people listening who feel impacted in the same way. And so I'd love for you to just shout out for us yet where we can find you on all the social platforms. Obviously, we're going to be connecting with you on the BodCon app, but give us all the shout outs so we can see all that you're doing.
Yeah, so it's in Spanish, so don't get scared when you hear it, but it's called
That's okay.
La Gorda Feminista, and it's everywhere like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, wherever. And I also have a body positive playlist for adults in Spanish and English in Spotify, so look me up. But I also have one for kids in Spanish and English. And
Oh,
I actually sometimes on my own listen to the one for kids, because
yeah.
there's different things. Like sometimes you want to be like, all like sassy and
Yes.
whatever. But there's a lot, I feel like, in this conversation around body positive parenting, for me, it's really been clear that we are also all healing our child, our
Yeah.
inner child.
That's what I
And
felt today, and you gave me
yeah,
some of that healing, so thank you. Beautifully said, Miriam. Thank you so much for being here. I know we all can't wait to connect with you beyond today. If you're listening here, thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on both Apple and Spotify. You can also rate and leave us a review. That would mean so much to us. And if you want to see Miriam and I and so many other incredible guests visually chatting it out, and I don't know about all of you, but like I'm so talkative with my hands. Be sure to check us out over on YouTube at the BodCon. You can also find us on all social platforms at the BodCon. We can't wait to see you there, and definitely can't wait to chat with you more on the app. So be sure to download the BodCon app and hit us up there. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the BodPod. We release new episodes every week, and we're available on all podcast streaming platforms and now YouTube too. Subscribe to our channels to be the first to know. Want to talk all things body confidence, enter amazing giveaways, and hear updates about the BodCon 2023? Find us on Instagram at the BodCon. My name's Rachel K. Grimm, and I'll see you next week.